Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I only have two sincere favors as we get started. One, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. And two, whenever you're shopping for stuff, use my affiliate links. I really appreciate that. This is the new 2025 KTM 390 Enduro R. And I'm happy to say it's a true dual sport motorcycle. What do I mean by that? I mean that this is legitimately a bike that you could use all during your week to commute to work. And then when it's time for the weekend, you can go and rip up your local trails with all of your friends. It's a true dual sport motorcycle. This is not like a KTM 350 or 500 EXC, which are simply enduro bikes with license plates and turn signals, have very unforgiving, harsh rides on the highway, and require high maintenance. This is not that. Priced at just $5,500 US, punching out a healthy 44 horsepower, featuring a 6-speed gearbox, switchable traction control, switchable ABS, an optional quick shifter, adjustable suspension, and a lot more. This 390 Enduro is already making huge waves in the dual sport marketplace. Is this the motorcycle that you should get instead of a Suzuki DR-Z4S, a Honda CRF300L, a Kawasaki KLX300, the venerable Suzuki DR650, and how does it compare to KTM's own 390 Adventure R, which I also have here for testing? So let's review this bike in depth and try to answer these questions. All right, I have a question for you as the audience, and you can put your answer down in the comments below. And as always, please be respectful and civil in the comments section. So lately, we're seeing a real rise in the popularity of Chinese and Indian built motorcycles, especially ones that are for sale here in the USA. This particular bike is built in India by KTM's partner and now, I guess, owner, Bajaj Motors. So what I'm asking is, are you willing to consider purchasing an Indian or even a Chinese built motorcycle, or would you rather pay more and get a Japanese built motorcycle? So that's the question for today's video.
Huge thanks to Law Tigers and our nationwide network of motorcycle lawyers for sponsoring today's video. The biggest mistake you can make if you're in a motorcycle accident is to not contact an attorney. Insurance companies are not on your side, and you'll need a lawyer to make sure you are treated fairly. To avoid getting a bare minimum insurance settlement, you'll need an attorney to fight for you. Law Tigers only gets paid if you do, and there is no upfront cost. They've been in business for over 20 years, and they support our riding community. Their contact information will be below. Thanks again to Law Tigers for sponsoring today's video.
All right, let's cover the specs on the 390 Enduro R. Base price in the US is $5,499. The wet weight of this bike is 365 pounds or 165 kilograms. Fuel capacity is 2.4 gallons or 9 liters. And I typically average around 55 miles a gallon or 4.2 liters per 100 kilometer. That's riding conservatively. If you ride more aggressively, that's going to drop a lot. So your range could be anywhere, around 100 miles, 120 miles, or 160 to 190 kilometers, which is kind of typical for a dual sport, maybe slightly better than some of the other dual sports out there. The engine on the bike is a 398cc single cylinder, and the power output is 44 horsepower and 28 pound-feet or 39 newton meters of torque. The major service interval, your valve inspection service, which is the big expensive one typically, versus your simple oil changes and stuff, that is 12,000 miles or 20,000 kilometers. Transmission on the bike is a 6-speed with a slip assist clutch and an optional quick shifter. Suspension, the front forks are 43 millimeter WP Apex. They have 230 millimeters or 9 inches of travel. They're adjustable for rebound and compression, but there's no preload adjustment on the forks. The shock, you can see back here, is WP Apex, the same 230 millimeters or 9 inches of travel, and it's adjustable for preload and for rebound, but not for compression. To adjust the preload, you simply remove this panel and use a wrench to adjust the preload. It's also extremely easy to remove the shock from these bikes. It just comes out here in about 2 minutes. So if you want to upgrade your suspension, it's very easy to do. Brakes on this bike are by Bibre, which is Brembo's Indian subsidiary. You've got this big 320 millimeter front disc with a 2-piston braking caliper. And notice that the brake is on the right side, and that is not what we usually see on motorcycles. I don't know why they're usually on the left, but it is something that I noticed that's quite different. Rear brake is a 240 millimeter disc with a single piston Bibre caliper. Tires and wheels, so your rear is a tube spoked. So these aren't tubeless wheels, they have tubes, but they are spoked. 18-inch rear wheel, and the bike comes, at least in the US at least, with these Metzeler Karoo 4 tires, which I found to be quite excellent tires actually for this bike. You can see the 21-inch front wheel here. Again, it does have a tube, it is spoked, and you get the Metzeler Karoo 4 tire as well. Electronics and rider aids on this bike, so we'll kind of cover that throughout the review, but you get the TFT dash here, which I'll show you in the tour. You get switchable ABS and switchable traction control, and both of those have off-road modes as well as being able to turn them off. And in addition to that, the bike remembers the settings no matter what you set it to. It remembers that when you power cycle the bike with the key, and that's amazing. One of the only motorcycles I've ever tested to remember the settings. All right, let's take a tour of the bike. Starting up here at the front, you can see the LED high and low beam headlight with this running light here in the middle. You can see LED turn signals, which is nice to have. We've talked about the chassis, the forks, the suspension, all that kind of stuff coming around the side. We've got the radiator up in there. We've got the horn, which I think hangs down way too far. It's kind of vulnerable out here. It'd be nice to tuck that in more. You can see the exhaust catalyst there. And then the skid plate, which is, you know, a modest level of protection, not really good for hard impacts, but for mild off-roading, I think it'll be okay. You can adjust the rear brake lever pad here, forward and back, which is nice. Pretty decent size factory foot pegs, although I would still upgrade these to larger pegs, as I've done on my personal 390 Adventure R. Got a coolant tank here. Underneath this panel, you can adjust the preload for the rear shock very easily. You've got these passenger peg detachable hangers here that come back, and then the passenger pegs here. The exhaust exits here. Down low, people have been concerned about how is that for water crossings. It's fine because exhaust flows outward, and so even if you submerge it momentarily, it doesn't seem to be an issue. So I like the lightweight, compact nature of the exhaust, and not having the exhaust up here, it keeps the weight low, and it doesn't have any interference with luggage and things like that. So I'm a fan of it. I think it's a good design. The seat, you can see it's got more of a bench seat than the 390 Adventure does. Doesn't really have anything to attach to back here, but you could deal with that in the aftermarket. The rear license plate holder assembly is pretty large, but it's sturdy. It doesn't fall off. It's sturdy mounted, it's strong. And you've got a couple brake lights and then turn signals as well. Of course, you've got chain drive. The passenger pegs, yeah, this one has this rubber thing on it to hold it because the passenger pegs can get floppy and kind of keep flopping down. You can see the shift mechanism here, the kickstand. So the kickstand sensor, the kickstand here. So the kickstand sensor, or the side stand, you see how the spring is here. So what happens is your boot kind of can touch it while riding, if you're standing up, and depress it, and then the kickstand kill switch activates and kills the bike when you're riding. This is an annoying problem that also happens on the 390 Adventure R. On my 390 Adventure R, what I've done is I defeated the sensor by gluing a magnet to the back of it so that it thinks the kickstand is up, because otherwise I couldn't really ride the bike the way it was. So kind of annoying. I think they are releasing some kind of fix for this soon to improve that situation. Oil filters and things like that down in here. The servicing's pretty easy on this bike. You can see the air intake going up through there. The air box access is right under this panel. Simply pop that off and a few screws, and you can get to your air cleaner, which is a paper element. Coming up to the controls, you've got these handguards, which are, they're pretty flimsy. Adjustable clutch and brake levers for reach, which I like. The switch gear works well. You've got a dedicated switch for the ABS, which is great. this 4-way joystick which controls the TFT. Your other controls are easy to use, no issue there. Handlebar, you can see it's got an adjustable position. It's got 3 different holes you can put it in, so you can move the handlebar forward and back, which is an awesome feature because for off-roading you want to get your weight forward. You want that handlebar forward and low for off-road riding. But if you're shorter or you like to have a more street bike setup, sitting down a lot, you can move the handlebar back, so I like that. The TFT dash is small and compact, but it's got good information. The tachometer is pretty big. Everything's legible. Gear position indicator. You've got indicator lights down here as well, a clock. And then you can go in here to the menu. You can go to the ride mode. We'll talk about more of the ride modes when we're out riding the bike, but you've got street and off-road, and you can configure traction control, ABS, and the quick shifter in each of those modes. That works really, really well. And then here in info, don't pay attention to the miles per gallon and stuff like that. That's all messed up from my testing. But in this bike, yeah, the way people have been riding this bike, it's been getting pretty low. You can see your coolant temp, oil temp. You can go through here, info, battery, odometer, service, clock and date, warnings. Okay, that's all fine. Yeah, and then you can reset your trip computers and stuff. So this works pretty well, and this does have connectivity, so you can connect your phone and do basic navigation, phone calls, and things like that, which is great to have on a bike at this price point. Being a dual sport bike, that's pretty cool. So I like this setup. It works well. Do I prefer the larger TFT on the 390 Adventure? Yes, but this is fine as well. Okay, seat height and riding position, and then we'll do drop and lift test on the 390 Enduro R. The 390 Enduro has a pretty reasonable seat height for a dual sport bike. It's 34.2 inches or 870 millimeters. That's lower than the KLX. It's lower than a DR-Z4S for sure. Lower than a 690 Enduro for sure. Way lower than something like an Enduro bike like a 500 EXC. So it's pretty reasonable. And they've kind of curved the sides of the seat here to make it easier to reach the ground. Go check it out in the showroom for yourself if you're shorter. I'm 5'10" or 178 centimeters tall. I have a 32-inch inseam. So let me show you how the seat height and the riding position look for me. Jumping on board, the suspension does have some decent sag to it, although you can obviously adjust the preload. But at my size, it's extremely easy to handle. I found that when riding it off-road and when I need to go through some technical areas or I get stuck or whatever, it's so easy to just have the ground pretty close to me. Riding a true enduro bike, you feel like you're just so high up in the air that it can be kind of intimidating. This doesn't have that. Now, the riding position is just upright, neutral, super comfortable. No issues with that whatsoever. And the seat is, decent. It's not a Goldwing, but it's for a dual sport. This is way better than the seat on like a DRZ or a CRF300 or a KLX300 or a DR650 or a lot of the other bikes. This is a really, really good seat actually, and doesn't punish you if you have to ride a couple hours on the highway. Now in terms of doing drop and lift, it's relatively lightweight compared to like an adventure bike, although it's heavier than some dual sports and it's heavier than an enduro bike. But it's really pretty straightforward to deal with. You don't have to even use any special lifting techniques because it's not all that heavy. You can just grab the handlebars and lift it up. It's no problem. All right, so how does the 390 Enduro R compare against the 390 Adventure R? Well, fortunately for all of us, I happen to have this 390 Adventure R as my long-term test bike that I purchased, and so I can give you a side-by-side comparison of the main differences. So first of all is the price point. $5,500 for the Enduro, $6,999 or $7,000 for the Adventure R. So $1,500 more to get the Adventure. The weight difference, it's 20 pounds or 9 kilograms. However, what you need to know about that is that extra weight is all up high on this bike and in the front. And that changes the handling. It makes the bike feel more top heavy. You've got this fairing and rally tower structure, the windshield, the bigger gas tank, which comes up further than on that. So the extra weight is not carried in a very good way in terms of the off-road performance. And the bike rides and feels quite a bit different because of that. The bikes have different gearing. So one of the reasons that the Enduro feels like it's faster than the Adventure is because it's got a 1448 gearing, whereas this has 1446. So a little bit peppier feel because you've got lower gearing, or lower gearing or shorter gearing on the Enduro. Of course, you can change the gearing on other bike if you want. Tires that the bikes come with, this bike has a bunch of aftermarket stuff, so disregard that, but you would get the Mitas Enduro Trail Plus on this bike, whereas this bike comes with the Metzler Karoo 4. So this bike comes with an off-road oriented adventure tire, and this bike comes with a 50/50 adventure tire, which makes sense given the missions of the two bikes. ABS capability, so the front ABS on the 390 Adventure does not have a way to turn it off, whereas the Enduro does. So for extreme conditions, you can turn that front ABS off on that bike, but not so on the Adventure. Ride modes, the 390 Adventure has one additional mode, which is rain mode, which I don't think it needs because like the whole bike is rain mode. It's not super fast. I don't know why you need the rain mode, to be honest with you, but it does have that additional mode. Fuel capacity is a pretty big difference, so you can almost see the physical difference in the fuel tank sizing. So you've got 3.7 gallons or 14 liters on the 390 Adventure, and you can go about 190 miles before you're kind of getting low or looking for gas on this. And on the Enduro, you've got 2.4 gallons or just 9 liters, so you're looking at maybe about 120 miles before you're looking for gas on that. So that's a pretty massive difference, and depending on how you're using the bike, that could be a decision point for you. Let's talk about the wind protection. Obviously, I mean, take a look at this. The wind coverage on the Adventure is comprehensive and excellent, and allows this bike to travel at high speeds and very good protection. Whereas the Enduro, it's a dual sport bike, so it doesn't have any wind protection to speak of. So if you're doing a lot of high-speed traveling on highways, then you would want to get the Adventure. The dashboards, you can see the differences here. You've got this large TFT, almost like you get on the 790s and 890s, whereas you get the small TFT over here on this bike. The seats are also different between the bikes. I've got this cool cover on here, which I really like, but you can kind of see this bike has this stepped seat, which is higher back here, and kind of has this step down here. It's also wider. This bike has more of an off-road bench style seat. This is a bit more comfortable, and they just have a different shape to them, but it makes sense. So which of these bikes is right for you? Well, there's no right or wrong answer. It simply depends on how much highway touring or traveling do you plan to do with it. If you're going to transport the bike to the trails in a van or a truck or something, then you probably don't need that, and you can get by with this, and this is lighter and more nimble and all that. But if you are doing a lot of highway travel and you're going to ride to the trails, or you're going to do a lot of higher speed riding, or you just have cold weather where you want the wind protection, you want the extra fuel range, then I think the Adventure makes a ton of sense for that. And you know, it's $1,500 price difference, I think makes total sense and is well justified based on the additional features and equipment and things that you get on the Adventure.
All right, let's do some performance tests here. We'll do 0 to 70 miles per hour. Back to 0, we're going to use our traction control, and we're going to use our APS. All right, pin it. Traction control light flashing away there. There's 65. There's 70 miles an hour. Okay, emergency brake, emergency stop. Okay, I'm extremely impressed with that. For a dual sport bike with off-road tires, that is extremely impressive. For the performance of the acceleration, and again for the braking, I thought was very, very good. The brakes do take quite a firm squeeze to get all the power out of them, but the power is very, very good in the brakes. I'm happy with it. You can't do that repeatedly because you will overheat the brakes, of course. This is very, very lively acceleration. I mean, look at that. This thing really goes. More hard braking there. I really enjoy having the rider aids on this bike. It makes the ride so much more enjoyable and gives you a lot of nice safety net there. right, riding the 390 Enduro on the highway. A couple things, obviously there's a lot of wind because there's no windshield on this bike. The mirrors buzz quite a bit. They have a lot of vibration in the mirrors. It can be kind of hard to see behind you. The overall vibration levels, so if I pick up the speed here a little bit, it's certain RPMs, and especially as you get to the higher RPMs, you do get some high frequency vibration coming through the handlebars. It's not a deal breaker, but it is definitely something that you notice right away, just that high frequency kind of buzz coming through the bike. It's just the way this engine is. In terms of highway power, I mean, as you can see, like, I can easily blast up to 80, 85 miles an hour without any issues. Yeah, this bike will go about 95 or 100 miles an hour, depending on the conditions, and cruising at 70 or 80 is actually pretty reasonable, except for the lack of the windshield. Actually, I'm pretty impressed with the overall highway manners of this bike. It's better than I thought, and it's because it has really good amount of horsepower. It doesn't struggle to go these higher speeds. Unlike a lot of its competitors, like the 300 dual sports and things like that, and compared to like a DRZ, having the 6th gear on here really makes the higher speeds much more reasonable, much more tolerable than the DRZ with the 5-speed transmission. All right, let's do some sort of sport riding testing on the 390 Enduro R. We are at some pretty high elevation. My testing area here is about 4,500 feet in elevation, and we're going up a steep hill during this, so that's going to work against the bike. So let's kind of see what the power and the handling and everything feels like. Traction control kicking in there as I held the full throttle over the cattle grate, a slippery metal surface. I mean, bombing up this mountain at easily accelerating 60, 65, 70, 75 miles an hour, no problem. This is really in stark contrast to something like a CRF300L or a KLX300 or something like that. It's so much more horsepower. I mean, this thing really is quite strong. Now, you do have to get the RPMs going pretty high. Below, if I shift into 6th gear and I try to accelerate, well, there's nothing happening. 5th gear, 4,000 RPM, nothing really happening. Again, we're going uphill. 4th gear, okay, so 5,000 RPM, everything changes. At 5,000 RPM, that's when you really take off. So the fuel cut, yeah, the fuel cut is 10,000. The fuel cut's 10,500 RPM. You've got to be willing to rev this bike, and when you do, you can go pretty fast. Now the handling is good. It's agile. It feels good road holding. I think the extra weight really helps it as a street bike. I really like having traction control for those sketchy moments. I like having the ABS for those sketchy moments, and I'll show the braking up here. Actually, as a street bike, this thing is a ton of fun. It has a supermoto type of feel to it, which is really, really nice. The quick shifter also works very, very well on this bike. Really, really enjoy using the quick shifter. It's just super smooth up and down. That adds a lot to the overall riding enjoyment. All right, let's quickly show you how the rider aids work off-road for the 390 Enduro R. They're a little different setup, I guess, than the 390 Adventure R, but they're kind of similar. So you do have off-road ABS settings, or you can turn ABS off entirely, and you do have an off-road traction control, or you can configure that to be off. So here's how this works. The bike has the off-road ride mode in addition to the road ride mode. You can customize how you want traction control and ABS configured in each mode. So see here in off-road, I have traction control turned to off-road mode and ABS in off-road mode, which means the front is on but the rear is off. I really like that. You can also turn the quick shifter off and on in case you didn't want it to be active in off-road mode, but although I don't know why you would really do that. All right, so now let's go here. All right, going back, now you can see it's going to give me ABS off rear. Now, if I want to turn traction control off, I can go in there and turn the traction control off. If I want to turn ABS off entirely, even to the front wheel, what I do is press this button here, and it's going to say ABS deactivated. Okay, it's now my ABS is off to the whole bike. All right, and this little light comes up here that says ABS, right? So you can do that. So I'm going to show you, actually, let's do this. I'll show you the acceleration and braking with the off-road traction control and the off-road ABS settings. So this is full throttle. Oh, this is full throttle with the traction control turned on. It lets the bike have a little bit of wheel spin, but not too much. It's a nice setting, and it can be useful in a lot of situations where you want to control your slip angle. It's a nice thing to have, and I'm glad that they did that. But I think if you're a really experienced off-road rider and skillful, you probably will just enjoy turning the traction control off entirely. And then your ABS, so here's a full emergency brake. I can feel my front brake lever pulsing as it uses the ABS, and my rear tire is sliding, of course. And then if I want, I can turn ABS off entirely. All right, I want to rip up this fire road here with the purpose of talking about the suspension performance at higher speeds. So suspension feels okay with lower speeds and things like that, but what happens when you ride faster is that while the fork has pretty decent hold up and pretty decent performance overall, even when pushing faster, it's the rear suspension that really lets you down. The rear shock on this bike, and the same problem is on the 390 Adventure R, is that it's just undersprung and underdamped and just not a good shock. Like it will, it bottoms out all the time on the rear shock. It just doesn't feel like you have good control of the bike when you push it, because the rear suspension is just far too soft and just too bouncy, and it just feels disconnected, and it's just in general it's bad. I mean, it's better than some bikes like a Honda CRF300L. It's definitely better than that, but it's still pretty poor. And oh god, just absolutely slammed the rear suspension into the bump stops. Like, it's almost painful, and I've already got my weight forward. I mean, like, bam, just goes through the suspension so fast. It's like there's just no compression damping there, and it's undersprung. I wish it was really, if you could improve that rear shock and just leave the front alone, you'd have such a better bike for riding fast. And you know, I'm 200 pounds or 90 kilograms. I think if you were around 150 pounds, that maybe suspension would work better for you. But if you're anything near my weight, the rear shock is much too soft and bottoms out far too frequently. If you ride with any sort of aggression at all. But beyond that, in terms of performance on fire roads, the bike is very good. It's got good power. It handles well. Again, the fork works pretty well. You have a lot more adjustability on the fork than you do with the rear shock. So yeah, it's really just let down by the rear shock. All right, sand. A lot of people struggle with sand. We'll go in this nice deep riverbed sand, although we got a little moisture in the sand today, so It'll help us a little bit, but I have no hesitation throwing this bike into a sand wash. It's light, it's agile, it's easy to handle, it's got great power. Really have zero hesitation. So we've got traction control off and ABS completely off to the whole bike, which I do appreciate having that you can turn the ABS off to the front, because I think for the riding you might want to do on this bike, that's a nice thing to have. Yep. Feels super light, super natural. Doesn't dig in or doesn't want to knife the front end in. I can just surf the sand to my heart's content. It feels very natural doing this. These tires are actually pretty impressive as well. Oh, there's my kickstand. Yeah, my boot. I was like, why is the bike cutting out? It's the my boot hitting the kickstand and then it cutting the power. That's still an issue on this thing. Let's go back. I'm kind of having fun with this. Let's go back the way we came. So, you know, riding this bike, it's about, yeah, you got to keep those revs, keep the engine spinning so that you make the power. If you get, oh man, that kickstand is really bugging me. Keeps cutting my power when I stand up. So I'll just sit down. Where did we go in up here? Was it here? I don't see my tire track. I guess it was over here somewhere. I'm lost. Oh, there we go. That's where I was. Yeah, great horsepower. Bike feels like a lightweight dual sport, even though on paper it's kind of heavy, but it doesn't feel heavy. Honestly, doing this stuff feels pretty good to me. No issues. Now we gotta pop up this embankment real quick. Great. Yeah, super easy, no problem. All right, let's put this Enduro on some Enduro trails. Now, you know, calling this bike an Enduro bike is really not technically correct because it's really a dual sport bike. Their EXCs are really their Enduro bikes, right? This is heavier. It's not really an Enduro bike, but you can ride this to work every day of the week and then come do, you know, trails on the weekend. So let's talk about how it works. You know, if you want to ride stuff like this, we'll get into some more interesting terrain up here in a minute. But on this kind of windy single track that's not technical, feels just fine. I'm not having any stalling or anything weird like that. The gearing, yeah, the gearing is tall for doing this, but you could change the gearing. Good clutch control. Again, you're not going to go enduro racing on this bike, but you can do a lot of stuff. Do you feel the weight of it? Yes. You do feel the weight of this versus a KTM EXC or something that's, you know, in a whole category smaller. And I think you do feel the extra weight a little bit versus something like, something like a KLX300 or a CRF300. Yeah, you do feel a little bit more. But the bike is still willing and happy to do, you know, legitimate off-road single track type riding. Yeah, I mean, it's honestly, it feels quite good to me. And I definitely would rather be on this trail than versus the 390 Adventure. It definitely doesn't have that weight up in here, and it feels more like a big dirt bike than the 390 Adventure does. I think if you wanted to do this kind of riding a lot, what you could do is you could lower the gearing by changing the sprockets. It already comes with lower gearing than the Adventure. You could do that, and then you could put on better tires. You know, these are more of an Adventure tire, and they're kind of at high pressure. But this is great. I would not take the Adventure bikes out here. It's way too. I mean, look at that hill there. It's like 45 degrees. It's crazy. Like this rocks and everything. No, I'm not gonna take the Adventure bikes. But this is really easy to ride out here on this stuff. I'm really having fun. Would I have more fun on this on maybe a 350 EXC? Yeah, because this is the kind of stuff that a 350 EXC or a proper enduro bike is, made for. But can I do it on this bike? Absolutely. And then that hill is making me nervous. I can also ride this bike to work during the week, and it's got the the long maintenance intervals and stuff. So yeah, it's a pretty awesome machine. This section here always gives me some fits. Okay. Not super stylish with my legs out a little bit, but we made it up the incredibly steep hill, the Hill of Tears. Even these tires managed to hook up. I didn't stall, nothing happened. I've got brush stuck in my bike here. Yeah, boy. This thing is totally legit. I mean, she's got a little bit of extra weight, but maybe 390 Enduro isn't such a bad name after all. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm impressed. And in some way, actually, I was going to say this, in some way, like going through the rocky stuff and the kind of sketchy stuff, up to a point, the extra weight just makes the bike more stable and kind of plow through it like a bulldozer. The lightweight bikes, you kind of shake around. This is a little bit better in that regard, although if going gets like properly technical enduro stuff, then this bike is too big and the suspension doesn't work right and the ground clearance isn't enough and all that. But I don't know. I'm super impressed with it. I would go just about anywhere with this bike. I really like how this bike holds the settings. I mean, ABS, I don't know, people always say, oh, there's a regulation that the bikes can't remember your ABS setting. Well, that's obviously not true because this one does. I have ABS totally turned off out here doing this enduro type riding, and the bike remembers it even when I key side. I love that. I don't have to worry about the traction control and the ABS messing all around on me. Yeah, I mean, the weight of the bike catches up to you a little bit, but just don't race. I mean, as long as you're not going into a race, I think you'll be great. Ah. Okay. Ooh. Oh. Okay. Guess we're going in these ruts. Also, because the bike is not crazy tall, I can reach the ground when I need to, because we're not all professionals who can just blast through technical sections. Sometimes we need to put a foot down and regain our footing, because not everybody is an expert professional enduro rider like you see on Instagram and all that.
All right, let's do the Big Rock report card, or BRRC, or as I like to call it, the BERC. It's a new thing that I've started to do, at least with the Adventure and Dual Sport bikes, and there'll be a link where you can download this and see this below. It gives you the basic specs of the bike that are important, and then I grade the bike in different areas. So let's get into the grading. So for off-road, for suspension, I do have to give it a C-. It really has to do with that rear shock performance, which is pretty poor. But I don't give it a total failing grade because the fork is pretty good. And also, if you're not riding faster on faster trails, and maybe if you're lighter, you may not notice the rear shock as much. Handling off-road, I give it an A. I think it's very good for what it is. Ground clearance, B. Rider aids, B. Braking, B. Ergonomics, B. Stability, B. and throttle response B. Throttle response, it doesn't have a lot of low-end power, but that doesn't mean the throttle response is bad. The throttle response is smooth, and I haven't had very much stalling with this bike, and it's not jerky throttle, so I give it a pretty good grade on throttle response. On-road grades, suspension, I'll give it a B+, handling A, I think it's quite good. Braking B, engine power B. Now, these are relative scores in the category, so of course, you know, compared to a 1290, it's not going to get a B in engine power, but compared to other dual sports in this price range, probably should get even an A, honestly. And then rider aids, I give it an A. I like having the rider aids, they work well. Comfort, wind protection, D, because, well, it doesn't have any, but it's really not supposed to. Engine heat, I don't notice engine heat making me uncomfortable, so I give that an A. Seating comfort, I'll give it a C. Initially, I wasn't too sure, but after riding it more, I think it's pretty decent for a dual sport bike, so I'll give it a passing grade there. Ergonomics, for comfort, I give it a B. Other grades, shift quality is A. Headlight, I didn't test it at night, so not applicable there. Lift test rating, I'll give it an A. Overall fun factor, I actually give it an A. Again, in the category, I think this is probably, well, it is the most fun bike to ride in this category, in this price range anyway. All right, now it's time to summarize the pros and cons to the 390 Enduro R. Number one for me on pros is the value for money with this bike. The features, the performance, the fun factor, compared to the bikes out there, I think it ranks really, really high in terms of value. And of course, the reason for that is it's built in India by KTM's partners, Bajaj. The next pro for me is that it's got a 6-speed transmission. You know, even the new DRZ is still going out there with a 5-speed transmission, which just feels a bit out of date, especially when you ride on the highway and you just have less gear ratios available. I really like the 6-speed. Next up for me is the engine is very powerful. You know, 44 horsepower for this segment at this price point is crazy, right? I mean, a KLX or a CRF300L have around 27 horsepower. This has 44, and it costs the same or less than those bikes. That's fantastic. Next up, the handling is very good, very agile, both on and off-road. Next up for me is a pro, long maintenance intervals. Again, what was it? 12,000 mile major service or 20,000 kilometer major service interval. That's really, really good. And you've got the long oil change intervals as well. Like, it's like a street bike level of maintenance. Compare that to a lot of the higher performance dual sports out there, whether it's KTM, Husky, Beta, even Honda CRF300 or CRF450L. This is much, much lower maintenance, meaning you could stack miles on this bike as a commuter and not have to worry about the maintenance aspect of it. Next up, it's got great road manners for a dual sport bike. I think some of the extra weight helps with that. Also, the features, I really like the traction control, the ABS, the quick shifter. These things make the bike more fun to ride, more safe to ride, allow you to use it more on the street and have that safety net, but when you're off-road, you can turn it off. And what's amazing is it remembers the settings. So when you turn the stuff off, if you're riding off-road, it remembers it. I love that. Not many bikes do that. And finally, as a pro, this is a true dual sport. We kind of talked about that at the beginning. What are the downsides? You know, no bike is perfect, and this bike is no exception. The suspension performance of the rear shock is pretty poor. I'm pretty surprised to see that. You know, testing the 390 Adventure R that I have for the long-term test, it's kind of similar to that. For some reason, this feels even worse. I have no way to explain that, but it does. It's an issue. The kickstand issue, so it's still your boot, if you're standing up, your boot can still hit the kickstand spring, push the kickstand down, and the bike will start to die because it thinks the kickstand is down. Now, you can overcome that. You can bypass that sensor, and that's up to you, and that's what you probably will do if you're doing a lot of off-road on this bike. And I believe that KTM is issuing a fix for that with a new spring and relocating things around, and I'm sure that will eventually be fixed, but it is very annoying. Another downside is I think it's a little bit heavy of a bike if you want to do extreme trail riding. I think the stuff that I showed in this video is about what you should consider doing with the bike. If you want to do a true extreme enduro riding, then get a true enduro bike. Get a 350 or a 500 EXC or whatever you prefer. The occasional stalling, although I haven't had it that much. It's much less on this than my 390 Adventure, and I have no reason to explain why. Another downside is the lack of low-end power. Below 5,000 RPM, there's really not much happening. You really have to get it above that RPM. Now, you get used to it. It's not a problem. It's not a deal breaker. And in fact, I'm actually fine with it, but it is going to take some getting used to if you're coming off a bike that has more low-end torque. And finally, the last downside for me is there is some high-frequency buzz vibration coming through the foot pegs, the seat, but probably most notably the handlebars, just the nature of how this engine is. All right, let's talk about the competition to the 390 Enduro R. I think the closest competitor, because it's the same price and has a similar mission of riding, would be Kawasaki's KLX300. It's $54.99. So there's a couple ways where the Kawasaki, I think, does beat out this bike. It's lighter by about 50 pounds or about 23 kilograms. You do notice that on single tracks and more enduro type riding, where the KLX does feel lighter in those situations. On the highway, however, actually the extra weight of this helps you not get blown around, helps it feel more stable, it tracks better, feels like a better road bike because of the extra weight, but off-road it can hurt you. Another way the Kawasaki, I think, is better than this bike is the suspension performance on the Kawasaki, while it's not amazing, is decent. And this bike is bordering on poor because, again, the rear shock, sometimes I almost feel like the rear shock is blown on this bike. Like it's just so, goes through the stroke way too much, bottoms way too much. Now, in a lot of the other areas, the 390 Enduro will definitely win out over the Kawasaki. It has more horsepower. You're talking about around a 25, 27 horsepower bike with the Kawasaki to 44 horsepower here. It is a massive difference. And even though this bike is a little heavier, this bike feels so much faster than the Kawasaki. It's not even right. It's not even a comparison. The KTM wins in terms of features. You know, you've got TFT dash, you've got a quick shifter, traction control, ABS, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really nice. That is a loud jet. All right, another area the KTM wins is this has a lower seat height than the Kawasaki does. This also has a little bit larger fuel tank and longer fuel range significantly. The KLX is a tiny fuel tank. I think it's around 2.1 gallons. And this is 2.7 gallons or 9 liters. This is much better. In terms of fun factor, this is way beyond the KLX. This is so much more fun to ride in almost every situation, except maybe for single track where you do kind of notice the extra weight. All right, let's move on to, everyone always wants to bring up the DR650. It'll never end with that thing. So the Suzuki is better, the DR650 is better in a couple ways. You get much more torque from that larger capacity engine. I mean, you're talking a 650 versus a 400. So you get more torque and more low-end power from the DR. There's no way around that. Now, in terms of horsepower, this actually has more and feels quite a bit faster and zippier because it's got more horsepower. The Suzuki wins in the area of aftermarket support because it's been out forever. And the Suzuki has the proven reliability, whereas I don't think it's fair to say this KTM is unreliable because nobody knows. That's a ridiculous statement to make. And again, like, don't confuse anecdotes out there with principle. Don't just say that all KTMs are unreliable because there was a few 890s that have camshaft issues. Like, it doesn't make sense to say that. But I will say that the Suzuki, you know, has been proven, and this has not. This just hasn't had the time to know whether this 390 platform is going to be super reliable or not. We just don't know. The KTM wins against the DR650 in almost every area of features and performance and rideability and everything and enjoyment and all that. You know, performance, fun, it's just cheaper than the DR. This has better safety features with traction control and ABS that you can turn off. This is a better off-road bike. This is a better on-road bike. I mean, it should be all those things because this is 30 or 40 years newer technology. I mean, come on, let's be real. The DR650, you're talking about probably a 40-year-old design. So anyway, all right, moving on to the new Suzuki DR-Z4S. Now, the DRZ is expensive, right? That's what's going against it. It's $9,000, which is way more than $5,500. The Suzuki has some advantages. It has a much stronger feel of low-end torque. I know if you look at the specs, the Suzuki on paper has similar torque to this, but it feels way more than that. This bike doesn't feel like it has the torque of the Suzuki. The low end power of the Suzuki is way more than this. This bike, you really have to rev it out, and we've talked about that so much already. The Suzuki suspension is far, far superior to this bike. Totally different universe of suspension performance. This is really bad compared to that, and that's a big win for the Suzuki. The Suzuki is also about, it's lighter by about 30 pounds, or about, what is that, 13 kilograms, somewhere in there, and that's a significant weight difference. Now the KTM wins in terms of price. The KTM wins in terms of having a 6-speed transmission, which makes it better on the road, gives you more gear ratios. KTM has more horsepower, 38 horsepower on the DR4 versus 44 here, and this does feel faster for sure. KTM wins on features, TFT dash, connectivity, quick shifter, things like that. KTM wins on lower seat height. The DRZ is a very tall bike and will be very tall for shorter riders, whereas this is a little bit more friendly for vertically challenged riders. All right, audience questions on the 390 Enduro R. I put out some posts on social media with this bike, and I got a ton of questions, and some people were frustrated I wasn't answering them there in real time, but my intent was to answer them in the video, which I'll do now. So tariffs. People ask about the tariffs and how that affects the pricing in the US. That's something that's happening right now. It's a hornet's nest to even start talking about that. The thing is, whatever the tariff is right now, it could change next week, next month, next year, and people are going to be watching this video for years into the future, so it's always going to be changing. But right now they do have, KTM is passing the tariff onto the consumer, which makes sense because why would they absorb it? So it's a tax that consumers have to pay to the US government, so it ends up being a tax increase, and that's the way that it works. Next up, is this a true 50-50 dual sport, but more modern and better than something like a DR650? Yes, I think that it is, absolutely. Next question, I think this was from Ben Dork on the Road. Really good question. Why would you buy this instead of the 390 Adventure R? Yeah, that's a good question. And for myself, I think I'd probably definitely go for the Adventure, and I did. But I think you'd get this. The reasons you'd get this is it's quite a bit less money, $1,500 less. It's lighter. It's better in technical off-roading because it's a little bit smaller, lighter feeling. It's a little bit zippier with the shorter gearing. And I think also if you're not doing if you're not doing much highway riding or any touring, and you don't need the big wind protection from the big fairing, and you don't care about the bigger dash and that stuff, then you could get this. I think also fuel range, if you don't go on longer rides and the fuel range on this is enough, then this is fine. This has more of a dual sport feel, whereas the other bike definitely has a little bit more of a small adventure bike feel to it. The way that I would look at it is if you want to take your bike in a truck or a van or something to the trails and ride around and then drive home in the van or the truck, this is probably a better bike for that. If you want to do the entire ride on your bike, including all the highway, then definitely you'd want to get the 390 Adventure. Why is it so heavy? A lot of people have talked about the weight. It's a price point thing, right? To make things lighter and still make them strong costs a lot of money. So to get the $5,500 price point, they use heavier, cheaper materials, and the bike is heavier. The weight is really not a problem if you're looking at it as an all-around bike, as a dual sport bike. It actually helps on the highway. If you want a true enduro bike, then you need to just get, a 350 EXC at that point, I think. Will it be Japanese Big 4 reliable? My honest answer is, if I had to guess, probably not as reliable as the Big 4 Japanese. But I will also say on this point that it's not a great idea to turn anecdotes out there into principles, right? So you see online that there's been a number of people that had camshaft issues on their LC8 engines, the 790, 890 engines. That doesn't then mean that all KTMs are unreliable. That's not a logical step to make. But I think a lot of people are just not understanding that, and they're jumping to conclusions that there's really no facts or data to support that. So don't turn anecdotes into principles or hard conclusions and make things black and white. That being said, you can make up your own mind about reliability and buy whatever you think is best for you. Have they fixed the ECU tuning? So yes, they are improving the ECU tuning as they go. My Adventure's already received some updates and it's been a lot better. This one, I haven't stalled on this very much at all. So I think they are improving that and they are making updates to it. Would I get this over a CRF300L or KLX300? Yes. I don't even have to think about it. To me, this is way more fun, way better. I don't see the downside to it. Do you feel the extra weight over the KLX or CRF300L or DRZ on single track? We've talked about that. I think you do feel it a little bit, but I really will take this bike to all the same places. It does feel a little heavier for sure, but I would take it to the same places. And on the highway, this is a much nicer bike to be on. Can you fit a larger fuel tank? We're not sure yet. Nobody knows yet because it's, the aftermarket hasn't been developed. Some people said, could you put the fuel tank from the Adventure? I don't know if that will work. I think the bodywork is different and things are different, so I wouldn't count on that being the case, but that will come to light in the future. Compared to a KTM 500 or 350 off-road, again, no, don't even try to compare it. This is over 100 pounds or 40, 45 kilograms heavier, doesn't have the suspension, doesn't have that. This is a dual sport bike, not an enduro bike. So no, it's not anywhere close to as capable as those, but I will just be brutally honest, the riding that I see most people doing with 500s and 350s would easily be done by this. I rarely see the people I know who own those EXCs taking them on anything that this wouldn't easily do. Now there are exceptions to that, of course, and there are some people that do true hardcore hard enduro, and for that you don't want this bike. But for fire roads and Jeep roads and even moderate single track, this bike is great. Is this a good training bike or companion to heavier adventure bike like a GS or a 1290 or something like that? Yes, you should get something like this or any dual sport bike to improve your off-road skills and learn the off-road bike handling before you try to ride those big bikes off-road. Why not just get a 690 Enduro? A lot of people are saying that's better. Well, it should be better because that bike costs over twice as much as this. So you could buy two of these and have money left over instead of getting a 690 Enduro. So to me, that's a bit of a silly question. All right, time for final thoughts on KTM's 390 Enduro R. So I'll tell you a story. When KTM announced this bike alongside the 390 Adventure R, I looked at the specs and kind of everything coming out about the bikes, and I thought to myself, okay, I understand the 390 Adventure R because it's a really lightweight, more capable adventure bike that's really affordable. I get that one. And then I looked at the 390 Enduro on paper or on the internet as it is, and I didn't really quite understand it. I thought, okay, a dual sport bike, I'm just gonna get the KLX, the CRF, a DRZ, something like that. And that's what I thought for quite a while. But then what happened is I got this bike, right, as a test bike for the past month, and I've been using it. And it turns out I was entirely dead wrong about my assumptions. And that's the thing that happens, right? We make assumptions about stuff based on what other people have said, or based on rumors, or based on reading a spec sheet online or something, watching a couple videos. But real world experience sometimes goes in opposition to maybe what we had thought before. And in practice, riding this bike on and off road, I found it to be insanely capable, insanely fun, and a true challenger to almost all the other dual sport bikes on the market right now. The 390 Enduro R is a rare breed because it's a true dual sport bike. Like I said at the beginning, you can use it to commute to work and ride on a highway, and then you can do some legitimate trails on the weekend, and you don't have the high maintenance or the high cost of a high performance enduro bike. And I think because of that, this thing is quite exceptional. And compared to something like a KLX or a CRF300 that have 27 horsepower and can feel very underpowered, this doesn't have that problem. Is the KTM 390 Enduro a perfect bike? Absolutely not. And there is no perfect bike out there, but it is I think a really, really amazing bike for the money. All right, well, I think that about wraps up this in-depth review on the 390 Enduro. If I've missed stuff, if you have questions, put that down below. I will do my absolute best to get back to you. Please support independent journalism here at Big Rock Moto. There's ways to do that down below in the description and the pinned comment. I think that's about it. Thanks for watching. Ride safe. I'll see you out there.